Welcome back, everybody. Glad to be back this week. We just had a great week. So tonight we're going to continue with chapter 12. We're going to read the study guide from chapter 11. Okay, so that starts on page 124. So we're going to go 124 on the heritage of the ultimate law of life and death. All right. Okay, so study guide from chapter 11. The following is a summary of key points from SGI President Ikeda's lecture. We can only spur others to embark on interchange through our conduct as people who are ourselves undertaking this same change by challenging our Buddhist practice. Okay? So you can't expect to do Kosarufu unless you're striving to live as the Buddha in your present form. Do you understand? This is the mission of the Bodhisattvas of the earth, to be that living example, led by Bodhisattva superior practices. Do you all understand what I just said? Mm-hmm. Okay, you're supposed to be like Nichiren. Mm-hmm. The significance of the transmission from Shakyamuni and many treasures to Bodhisattva superior practices in the Lotus Sutra. Mm-hmm. The heritage of the ultimate law of life. In the heritage of the ultimate law of life, Nichiren clarifies the practice of chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo as the way to receive the heritage of the law of life and death. He writes, the important point is to carry out your practice confident that Nam-myoho Renge-kyo alone is the heritage that was transferred from Shakyamuni and many treasures to Bodhisattva superior practices. So I'll pause here to say, Mr. Lee, you have a question about the 7th chapter of the Lotus Sutra. I will answer that after we finish this lecture on the heritage of the ultimate law of life and death. Okay? Asserting that Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is the law entrusted to superior practices by Shakyamuni and many treasures in the Lotus Sutra, Nichiren later affirms that he himself is superior practices. In addition, this entrustment, which is the crux of the teaching of the Lotus Sutra, marks the transition from the teaching and teacher of true effect to those of true cause, a radical change in the framework of the Buddhist teachings that is necessary for the realization of the Buddha's vow for universal enlightenment. From the Buddha of true effect to the Buddha of true cause. True effect refers to the enlightenment Shakyamuni attained in the remote past, while true cause is the practice he carried out to attain that enlightenment. Bodhisattva superior practices appeared in the real world as an ordinary human being who embodied the Buddhism of true cause in his own life and conveyed it to others. That's Nichiren. What distinguishes the Buddhism of true cause from the Buddhism of true effect is that in the former, cause and effect are simultaneously present in the mystic law. This mystic law is the true seed of Buddhahood. Based on this law of causality, ordinary people can attain enlightenment just as they are by chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Nichiren states, Shakyamuni Buddha who has attained perfect enlightenment is our own flesh and blood. His practices and the resulting virtues are our bones and marrow. In other words, when we firmly establish in our lives Buddhist practice and the benefit of Buddhahood, in other words, Buddhahood in your present form, we can manifest the life state of the Buddha of perfect enlightenment. There is no greater Buddha than that Buddha that you are in your present form. Do you understand that? That's the same Buddha as all the other Buddhas. All right? Unlike the Buddhists, you're not a lesser Buddha or a minor Buddha or a human Buddha. Okay? Unlike the Buddhism of a true cause Buddha, unlike a true effect Buddha, unlike the Buddhism of true effect, in which enlightenment is viewed as something distant and unattainable, the Buddhism of true cause inspires action for the happiness of self and others. It has to, because that's the only way it can be attained. It's the only way you can achieve it. The essence of the Buddhism of true cause, a struggle against devilish functions. And this is very important. I'm going through that right now, personally. Okay. Nichiren lived based on his lifelong vow for the enlightenment, peace, and happiness of all people, the aspirations of the Lotus Sutra, and infused his faith into the chanting of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, which he taught to others. For his belief and actions as a votary of the Lotus Sutra, he was persecuted. He battled and triumphed over the attacks by the ruling authorities and their supporters. At Tatsunokuchi, having almost been executed, he demonstrated the merit and practice of Buddhahood as an individual confronting and resolutely prevailing over the hindrances of death and the devil king, the epitome of destructive and manipulative forces. It was during this Tatsunokuchi persecution that he discarded his transient status and revealed his true identity. Nichiren writes, as the Buddha of the latter day of the law. Nichiren writes, superior practices, the leader of the bodhisattvas of the earth, has already made his advent in this world. So the great law, the essence of the Lotus Sutra that was entrusted to him, will spread without fail. His words resound with his awareness as the teacher of true cause of the latter day, who has proven the power of the law as a bodhisattva Buddha, an enlightened human being. An enlightened human being. Okay? Nichiren Buddhism is grounded on the relationship of mentor and disciple. That's what this whole heritage of the ultimate law of life is about. It's passing on the truth, the thing that gets you there, the understanding that is correct. Human beings, in a sense, are weak and find it extremely hard to break through their fundamental darkness. But they also have the capacity for great mobility through belief in their innate power and that of others. Through contact with the life of a great victor like Nichiren, we discover our own limitless potential. By carrying on Nichiren's teachings and helping others become happy, we actualize our enlightenment. Moreover, because Nichiren successfully established the philosophy of ultimate humanism and empowerment, we consider him the teacher of all humankind, because he was the first one to convey this ability that we can emulate and attain Buddhahood in our present form. The great path of a humanistic religion. The Lotus Sutra is a teaching of revitalization, celebrating the limitless potential and dignity of each of life. The Lotus Sutra is a teaching of revitalization, celebrating the limitless potential and dignity of life of each person. Nichiren distilled this essence in Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, and the SGI extends this humanistic religion to the world. The three founding presidents of the Soka Gakkai, Tanesaburo Makaguchi, Josei Toda, and Daisaku Ikeda, have actualized the Buddhist practice of Shakyamuni and Nichiren based on their shared commitment to Kosen Rufu. Their practice as mentors and disciples is the starting point for spreading this movement for human revolution. As mentors and disciples, their practice as mentors and disciples is the starting point for spreading this movement for human revolution. It is our mission and function as SGI members, as bodhisattvas of the earth, to continue this legacy and become living examples of this humanistic philosophy. So, what's this basically whole thing been talking about? What's the key to achieving Kosen Rufu? The proof of actual fact. It's the proof of people actually doing what the teaching says can be accomplished. Actualizing that. You know, not theoretically talking about it like happy talk or something that happens someday. It's who you are in this moment. Right? So going on, we're finally going to get to page 127 in chapter 12. And this is probably the most dynamic chapter we've read so far. There's a lot of really deep truth that's been preceded by other things that is going to be, encapsulated in this. So please pay attention. Earthly desires are enlightenment, and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana, is the title of this chapter. And the subtitle is Transforming Illusion and Sufferings into Confidence, Joy, and Hope. Well, what did that just then basically say? Going from being a common mortal to being a Buddha. All right? Attaining Buddhahood in your present form. Okay? From transforming illusion and suffering, common mortal, into confidence, joy, and hope. Because you know the truth. You know the truth of your own identity. You know the truth of the identity of everyone around you. All right? Here we go. The end of the Gosho reads, Be resolved to summon forth the great power of faith and chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo with the prayer that your faith will be steadfast and correct at the moment of death. Never seek any other way to inherit the ultimate law of life and death and manifest it in your life. Only then will you realize that earthly desires are enlightenment, and that the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana. Even embracing the Lotus Sutra would be useless without the heritage of faith, because you can't understand those 2 points without that. All right? I will go into particulars again on another occasion. With my deep respect, Nichiren, the Shramana of Japan, the great sage of Japan. On the 11th day of the 2nd month of the 9th year of Brunei, 1272, cyclical sign, Mizuno-e Saru. A reply to the Honorable Sairenbo, the writings of Nichiren Daishonin, volume 1, page 218. So we go to page 128 and start the lecture for chapter 12. You're going to love this. You ready?
Yes.
This is good stuff. The beneficial power of the mystic law is immeasurable. If we continue to practice correctly, this is the key, to practice correctly, just as Nichiren Daishonin teaches, we can achieve the supreme state of attaining Buddhahood in this present irreplaceable lifetime. In the final passage of the Heritage of the Ultimate Law of Life, Nichiren clarifies the key to correct faith for inheriting the law and calls on us to lead truly unsurpassed lives. Pardon me. The Soka Gakkai alone has inherited the ultimate law of life and death from Nichiren, correctly upholding and practicing his teaching and spreading it widely throughout the world in accord with his instructions. It's the only entity that's done that in accord with his instructions, by the way. That is why the infinite power of the mystic law emerges powerfully in the lives of each of us who exert ourselves for Kosen Rufu. So what did that just say? What is the real influence, the impetus behind you being able to exhibit this power of the Buddha? Your commitment to Kosen Rufu. The reason you're becoming a Buddha is to establish Kosen Rufu, not to be a cool Buddha. Right? Buddhas don't appear for the sake of themselves. They appear for the sake of all others. When we bring forth from within us the great joy that comes from realizing that we are entities of the mystic law, we can change even the most irretractable problems and sufferings into wisdom and freely utilize the struggle as a force for value creation. We inherently possess the fundamental power to overcome any seemingly impossible deadlock. When we believe with unshakable certainty in our innate power to change poison into medicine, that would be doubt-free faith, frankly, Mugi Washin, baby. The power to turn any hardship into a springboard to absolute happiness, we have nothing to fear. The mystic law is the fundamental principle that allows us to draw forth the limitless power we inherently possess. We inherently possess. It's already there. We have to learn how to tap into it and reveal who we really are. It enables us to change earthly desires or deluded impulses into wisdom, just as a fire burns firewood to produce light. We can also transform a life that has been filled with the sufferings of birth and death into one pervaded by vibrant and unbounded joy, just as spring sunshine can melt ice and snow to create a flowing stream. Self-transformation. This is the main theme of Buddhism. Self-transformation. This is the theme of Buddhism, main theme of Buddhism. Nichiren Buddhism is a teaching that actually transforms lives. Everything starts with us, with our own human revolution. This forms the basic underpinning of Nichiren Buddhism and the activities of the Soka Gakkai. Again, in this closing passage of the Heritage of the Ultimate Law of Life, Nichiren seems to be calling out to us, awaken to the vast power you possess. Chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo with the firm belief that you will achieve a wonderful life of great fulfillment. This itself is the true heritage. He concludes this writing by clarifying that the heritage of faith is the sole means through which we, and indeed all people, can share in the heritage for attaining Buddhahood. Going on to page 129, first column. The essence of faith for inheriting the law. The heritage of the ultimate law of life brims throughout with the fundamental Buddhist spirit to enable all people to realize enlightenment, to actualize it in their lives, to become Buddhas in their present form. Pervading it is Nichiren Daishonin's great compassionate wish to make it possible for all human beings to lead lives of supreme happiness. In the previous installment, we studied the passage in which Nichiren declares that he has been carrying out the mission of Bodhisattva superior practices who inherited the law of life and death and vowed to appear in the latter day. As is evident from this fact, it is none other than Nichiren Daishonin who established the great law for the enlightenment of all people. He is the teacher of true cause. The final passage which follows sets forth the essential elements of faith necessary for people of the latter day to inherit from Nichiren the law for attaining Buddhahood. These are summed up as the great power of faith, a correct and steadfast mind at the moment of death, the realization that earthly desires are enlightenment and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana, and the heritage of faith. Go read that off of page 218. In this and the next installment, I will discuss these principles and their practice. First, Nichiren says, be resolved to summon forth the great power of faith. Be resolved implies a conscious commitment and determination. So, what's that mean?
Faith without doubt.
Not only that, but that you view your life as a disciple of the original teacher. You view your life as a bodhisattva of the earth. This is a conscious determination, commitment and determination. The bodhisattvas of the earth are the ones that have made this conscious commitment and determination and appear in the latter day of the law in order to actualize their vow. That's what this is talking about, the vow. Right? Okay. So he said, be resolved implies a conscious commitment and determination. You've got to be serious as a heart attack if you're actually going to achieve this. It isn't easy. You're going to be rebuffed by fundamental darkness over and over again. You better be locked in and committed that you're going to follow through to the end, or you'll never see what you've been working for. You'll get robbed. The devil of the sixth heaven will rob you. I know many people that have been robbed, completely robbed, because they didn't follow through to the very end. When it became too difficult, they gave up. This is the key. It could be said that the great power of faith means the ability to continually rededicate ourselves and summon fresh faith in our hearts. This is very important. That only comes from daimoku, and that only comes from an ongoing daily relationship with a gohonzon. Or else, again, fundamental darkness will suck you out. All right? Next, he explains what we need to do in concrete terms of our Buddhist practice, saying, chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, with the prayer that your faith will be steadfast and correct at the moment of death. So what does that mean? It means you should be chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo with the prayer that your faith will be steadfast and correct at the moment of death. It's saying be serious about this. Don't assume that you're going to just be there as part of the crew. You have to absolutely go for this with the sense of mission that you're fulfilling your vow as a bodhisattva of the earth. If that's the case, then you're going to automatically make this prayer in order to achieve what you will achieve as a bodhisattva of the earth in this lifetime. Do you understand? All right, this is all about attaining Buddhahood in your present form. Continuing on page 129, we have already discussed at length earlier in this series the concept of having a correct and steadfast mind or attitude in faith at the moment of death. Bringing one's life to a close with a sense of great fulfillment and serenity as a result of our faith in the mystic law without being perturbed by the hindrance of death or other devilish functions leads to the attainment of a boundless and enduring state of happiness. This will assure that you've attained enlightenment in your present form in this lifetime, so that you're guaranteed Buddhahood in all of your future lifetimes. That's why it's so significant. Grab the opportunity in life, in this moment, to assure everything that will follow. If you don't grab it, you can't be assured you're going to get another chance or that you're going to be in the same position to execute what you blew off executing this time. Do you understand? Okay. So he says, in order to have, on the last full paragraph on page 129, second column, in order to have a correct and steadfast mind at the moment of death, it is crucial that we strive day after day, month after month, with the spirit of faith that now is the last moment. Okay? We can't think we've got time to do this later. It's got to constantly be an ever-present understanding and seriousness about the true nature of our life as Buddhists, right? Okay? Always living in such a way that we have no regrets. This is the key. If you can think and you can think about regrets, then you need to straighten those out. You don't have to be like thinking about, I've made mistakes and constantly. That's not what he's talking about. No regrets means that you're confident in the path that you're on as a Buddha. All right? In order for us to attain this state of mind, Nichiren teaches us to deepen our prayers each day. Deepen them. Now, what does deepen them mean, though? To pray harder? It means to broaden them and have them become more profound so that you're not praying about, I want stuff, I want stuff, I want stuff, and instead you're beginning to reflect the psyche of someone that's attained this state of awareness and clarity that is beginning to think this way about their life. Because people don't think this way about their life from the beginning of their practice. Do you understand? Okay, so he says, Nichiren teaches us to deepen our prayers each day and persevere, because we're going to be facing obstacles and difficulties, but we're also going to be showered into victories because we conquer all of those things when we approach them with correct faith. So there's nothing but victory involved in that process. He says Nichiren teaches us to deepen our prayers each day and persevere with a resolve to practice faith wholeheartedly. He also informs us that there is no way to inherit the ultimate law of life and death apart from correctly practicing Buddhism, which is taking on this responsibility and overcoming these devilish functions over and over and over again throughout the course of our lives. This, page 129 going to 130, this means summoning forth the great power of faith, because that's the only way you overcome those issues, and chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo for the happiness of ourselves and others, confident that we will have a correct and steadfast mind at the moment of death. So what's that say? Practicing as Buddhas in our present form. That's what that's talking about. That confidence, that understanding, is understanding the truth of our life as it's been expressed by the original teacher. Okay? Not having doubts about what that teaching says about who we really are. Okay? Or the source of what we're doing. Do you understand? That's the doubt-free faith part of it. So he goes, 130. Inner transformation lies at the heart of inheriting the law. So what did he say over here? On page 128, he says, self-transformation. This is the main theme of Buddhism. Okay? So now we're talking about that self-transformation. Is this inner transformation that's going to be discussed now? Inner transformation lies at the heart of inheriting the law. So if you're inheriting the law as a bodhisattva of the earth, this transformation is going to occur, because what is the transformation? Going from being a common mortal in the 9 worlds to being a living Buddha. Okay? A human being, a Buddha human being, as he just called the Daishonin. Are you with me?
Yes.
Okay. In his conclusion, page 130, first column, in his conclusion to this writing, Nichiren Daishonin focuses on what each of us needs to do to achieve enlightenment. So it's very simple. He's laid it out here. The Buddhism of true cause, propagated by Nichiren, is a teaching for people to actualize the causality for attaining Buddhahood. What did that say? Nichiren's Buddhism is for attaining Buddhahood. Okay? It's not for understanding some lofty anything. It's being the Buddha in your present form. That's why we chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. That's where it's headed from day one. People are the foundation And that's why. They are the foundation. Each person is important. Unless the spirit of valuing each individual is put into practice, any theorizing on the heritage of the law, no matter how exalted, will be empty. This also means that those who practice Nichiren Buddhism must have the awareness and confidence that they can definitely change their lives on a profound level. You've got to have faith that you can be the Buddha in your present form. You've got to have faith that the power of the law is that you can overcome any obstacle. Okay, you can change poison into medicine, any poison. Okay? The reason Nichiren says never seek any other way than this to inherit the ultimate law of life and death and manifest it in your life is that the heritage of the law does not exist from faith in the Buddhism of true cause, which enables each person to transform themselves inside and attain Buddhahood in this lifetime based on chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. That was a mouthful, but let me read it again. All right? Were you all with me on that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me say it again, though. This also means that those who practice Nichiren Buddhism must have the awareness. It means that they're thinking about it. That's what he talked about before. This is this commitment. I want to be the Buddha. I'm not just about benefits, right? The awareness and confidence, that's the doubt-free faith, that they can definitely change their lives on a profound level. The reason Nichiren says never seek any other way than this profound, deep faith, all right, to inherit the ultimate law of life and death and manifest it in your life, to express your Buddhahood in your present form, is that the heritage of the law does not exist apart from faith in the Buddhism of true cause. That is it. They're the same thing. All right? Which enables each person to transform themselves inside and attain Buddhahood in this lifetime based on chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. So faith, just like I said 2 years ago. In what way, then, are our lives actually transformed? What kind of life state can we attain through faith? In relation to this, Nichiren writes, only then will you realize that earthly desires are enlightenment and that the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana. You have to experience this. You have to go through this process before you get to know what there is to know. You don't get a peek at it until you do it the way you're supposed to do it. Because it requires faith. Summoning the great power of faith and chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo with the prayer that our faith will be steadfast and correct at the moment of death is in itself constitutes the realization that earthly desires are enlightenment and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana. Attaining this state of life is the true benefit of Nichiren Buddhism. And it says it just qualified this is the true benefit of Nichiren Buddhism. Let me read that paragraph again as well. In what way then are our lives actually transformed? That's a good question. What kind of life state can we attain through faith as living human beings? In relation to this, Nichiren writes, only then will you realize, only then, after you've done these things that I've just discussed previous to this point in my discussion here, only then will you realize that earthly desires are enlightenment. You'll look back and you'll realize that all the shit you chanted for is why you now chant the way you chant, which isn't the way you used to chant. But without those things that allowed you to get to this point, you wouldn't be where you are in this moment. That's earthly desires or enlightenment. Those earthly desires have led you to the truth. Okay? Okay? And that the sufferings of birth, and death are nirvana. Summoning the great power of faith and chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo with the prayer that our faith will be steadfast and correct at the moment of death is in itself constitutes the realization that earthly desires are enlightened and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana. Why? Because when you're chanting this way, you're chanting about the last moment of your life. You're already looking toward Buddhahood. That's why are you chanting that prayer? Because you want to make sure that you go into death in the state of Buddhahood, right? You want to enter birth and death in the realm of Buddhahood, right? That's the whole goal. That's the whole deal. Get it? So that's why you are having that steadfast and that prayer. Do you understand? That prayer is because you already understand the correctness of what you're doing. So he's saying that attaining this state of life is the true benefit of Nichiren Buddhism. What this means is that through the power of strong and unshakable faith and chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, we can turn illusions and suffering into the means, the mechanism by which the means for developing value-creating wisdom and establish an inner state of complete assurance and joy. All right? The state of mind that can perceive earthly desires as enlightenment and the sufferings of birth and death as nirvana. The state of mind that can perceive that truth as exactly what it says it is and not be confused by it, but can go, oh yeah, that's it. All right? Is synonymous with the attainment of Buddhahood in one's present form. That's what it is to understand that. All right? This is also the great benefit of changing poison into medicine, because that's what you've done. You've turned the 9 worlds into the 10th. That's hot shit. In the Buddhism of true cause, all people, through the power of faith, can forge in the depths of their lives the great and indestructible state of Buddhahood. All people. Top of page 131. The life state and benefit of attaining Buddhahood in one's present form. Okay, and this is the whole thing that a lot of people don't really take as seriously as President Cade is talking about it here. He's saying basically this is it, right? If you didn't do this, you really didn't practice Buddhism, frankly speaking. The concepts, top of page 131, second column. The concepts, earthly desires are enlightenment, and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana, both describe transformative functions inherent in life. Ooh. Earthly desires are enlightenment means that the wisdom for attaining Buddhahood, i.e. enlightenment, appears in lives dominated by earthly desires or deluded impulses. Yeah! The sufferings of birth and death or nirvana means that the state of true peace and tranquility of the Buddha, nirvana, manifests in lives that are racked by the sufferings of birth and death. Yeah! In Nichiren Buddhism, in Nichiren Daishonen's writings, we find that there are very few instances where one of these two principles is mentioned alone without the other. They appear together to express either the life state or the benefit of attaining Buddhahood in one's present form. The causality of the seeds of opposites and the mystic law of changing poison into medicine. Please listen carefully. This is really good stuff. Bottom of page 131. Taken in a literal sense, earthly desires and enlightenment are diametric opposites and cannot be identified with one another. The same can be said of the sufferings of birth and death and nirvana. Rather, it is earthly desires and the sufferings of birth and death that are similar. Right? Makes sense, right? As is well known, Shakyamuni Buddha deeply perceived the causal role that earthly desires such as greed, anger, and foolishness play in creating the sufferings of birth and death. This view of causality led to the Hinayana Buddhist practice. This view of causality led to the Hinayana Buddhist practice of striving to eradicate earthly desires in order to free oneself from these fundamental sufferings. The way of practicing Buddhism, however, caused people to despise and seek to escape the sufferings of birth and death. That was because it was focused solely on eliminating earthly desires. Evil. Based on a partial concept of causality that held that evil is the only possible outcome of evil. With such a view, efforts, right? Okay, you understand? Evil always makes evil, right? No. Not based on the simultaneity of cause and effect. That's the whole cool thing about the seeds of opposites that is being explained right here. So that's why I said listen carefully. I'm going to read it again. This view of causality led to Hinayana Buddhist practice of striving to eradicate earthly desires in order to free oneself from these fundamental sufferings. This way of practicing Buddhism, however, caused people to despise and seek to escape the sufferings of birth and death. They didn't want to be born anymore. Nirvana is blown out, right? It's a cessation of existence, right? That was because it was focused solely on eliminating earthly desires, based on a partial concept of causality that held that evil is the only possible outcome of evil. With such a view, efforts to completely eradicate evil were destined to be frustrating and ultimately futile. Although the provisional Mahayana teachings subsequently taught the principles of earthly desires are enlightenment and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana, the actual practice of these teachings comprised aspiring for the attainment of Buddhahood by either endlessly accumulating good causes, or as seen, for example, in the idea of carrying out austere practices throughout many lifetimes, or depending for salvation on an absolute Buddha that transcends this world, like a Mida. Okay? Somebody's going to just take you to the Buddha land, right? Right? Ultimately, however, such Mahayana practices and beliefs also caused people to abhor the sufferings of birth and death and seek to escape this world. This was because, at the top of page 133, this was because these practices and beliefs were based on a partial concept of causality that held that good can only be produced by good. Cause and effect, right? What happened was that those who carried out a self-reliant bodhisattva practice could only hope to attain enlightenment in the inconceivably distant future. Those who practiced with a dependent faith had no choice but to rely on the agency of an absolute Buddha, such as Amida, to free themselves from the Sahe world and be reborn in the good circumstances of a Pure Land, where they could resume their efforts to accumulate good causes. Talking about Mahayana Buddhism. Do you
So
understand?
it's to say that there is no good, no bad?
No, you haven't let me finish reading.
Okay.
There's definitely good and there's definitely bad. The beautiful thing I'm talking about right now is the reality of the Buddhism sowing of the simultaneity of cause and effect says that good can come from bad and bad can come from good. It's not good is only equals good and bad only equals bad. Let President Kate explain it to you. You still have a question, I'll answer it then. Okay? Let me go back. What happened was that the top of page 133 again. This was because these practices and beliefs were based on a partial concept of causality that held that good can only be produced by good. What happened was that those who carried out a self-reliant bodhisattva practice could only hope to attain enlightenment in the... If you're not already in the 10th world, how are you going to get to the 10th world then? You got to only create more good causes and wait for that lifetime where you make that leap. Do you understand? Those who practice with a dependent faith had no choice but to rely on the agency of an absolute Buddha, somebody that would take them all the way to bodhisattvahood. Because if you were a normal human being, were you a bodhisattva? No, bodhisattvas were separate. Don't forget, cause awakened ones and voice hearers, cause awakened ones, and bodhisattvas were all three separate phases of existence. They were not something that you did in the same lifetime. Okay? That's what he's talking about here. All right? You would have to go from being a human being to try to become a voice hearer to then hopefully you would progress to be a pratyeka Buddha, and then eventually you'd be able to be a bodhisattva, and then eventually, maybe someday in 1 trillion lifetimes, you'd become a Buddha.
But there is a kind of hierarchy that doesn't exist in this case.
There is no hierarchy. That's all called delusion. Okay, that's
but it's
exactly
everywhere. It's everywhere, the hierarchy.
Yes, of course. That's why this is so unique and why this is the correct understanding of the truth. That's why this is the heritage of the ultimate law of life. Okay? So let's continue as President Ikeda explains this. Those who practice with a dependent faith had no choice but to rely on the agency of an absolute Buddha or God as such as a means to free themselves from the Sahe world and be reborn in good circumstances of a pure land where they could resume their efforts to accumulate good causes. Either way, there was no guarantee of attaining the fruit of practice in this lifetime. Ultimately, this causal perspective is merely the reverse of the belief that evil only produces evil. It's just the reverse of evil only produces evil, which you already said no. Right here, right? Okay? So good only produces good is also just as baloney as evil only produces
you can
evil. Let me finish. Be that as it may, people whose lives were shackled by the illusions of earthly desires and the sufferings of birth and death naturally were unable to gain the true joy of being liberated from those chains, and there was nothing to give them any real hope or confidence of attaining enlightenment prior to Nichiren's Buddhism of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Nichiren Daishonin has the following to say with regard to the erroneous approaches of the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings, which all of what I just discussed was, toward earthly desires and the sufferings of birth and death, and the relationship to enlightenment and nirvana. The heart of the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings, this is quoted, this is the Daishonin talking evidently, the heart of the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings is that one should discard earthly desires, despise the sufferings of birth and death, and seek enlightenment and nirvana elsewhere. This spirit of the spirit of the Lotus Sutra is that earthly desires are enlightenment and that the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana. What then does it mean to regard earthly desires and the sufferings of birth and death as inseparable from enlightenment and nirvana? In a writing titled What It Means to Hear the Buddha Vehicle for the First Time, which I read for all of you, it's in volume 2, addressed to his disciple, lay disciple Toki Jonin. So you already know the answer to this, it's been read to you. Nichiren says that the essence of ordinary people practicing the Lotus Sutra is found in the concept of the seed of opposites. The seed, that's from WND 2, page 741, by the way. You should read that Gosha. Pardon me. The seed of opposites means that which is the opposite of the effect or fruit of attaining Buddhahood, namely earthly desires and the sufferings of birth and death, becomes the cause or seed for attaining Buddhahood. All right? Both these partial concepts of causality, of viewing evil as the only possible outcome of evil, or viewing good as the only possible outcome of good, are inadequate for enabling ordinary people to gain enlightenment. Because you can't do human revolution that way. In the final analysis, an approach that draws a hard and fast distinction between good and evil cannot but cause people who have no choice but to live in the midst of evil to lose hope. And also, what is the difference between good and evil? They're two sides of the same thing. There's no separation between good and evil. You're trying to make good and evil two different things, and they're not two different things. The law of the simultaneity cause and effect says they're flippable. Do you understand? That's the whole idea. That's how you can attain Buddhahood in your present form. The only reason you can. All right? So, both these partial concepts of causality, of viewing evil as the only possible outcome of evil or viewing good as the only possible outcome of good, are inadequate for enabling. If we're enabling, you can't. That outlook does not allow for you to do this. For enabling ordinary people to gain enlightenment. In the final analysis, an approach that draws a hard and fast distinction between good and evil cannot but cause people who have no choice but to live in the midst of evil to lose hope. Many of the Buddhist schools in Nichiren's day had grown divorced from reality or had succumbed to a narrow elitism with a focus on a small group of practitioners or priests, just the people that were supporting that had the coin to do it, the power to do it. A probable reason for this is that viewing good and evil as distinct and separate, they were unable to give hope to people living in an evil and defiled age. You hear that all the time now. Right? With all other philosophies. How could all these other bad things happen? Right? It seems likely that Nichiren emphasized the seeds of opposites because he realized if people were to have genuine hope in life, it was vital for them to have a view of causality that offers the possibility of good coming out of evil. the possibility that something negative can be transformed into something positive. In What It Means to Hear the Buddha Vehicle for the First Time, Nietzsche describes this causality of the seed of opposites as changing poison into medicine.
Yes.
This principle teaches that, just as a skilled physician can use even a poison or toxic substance as medicine, through the power of the mystic law, we can transform the three paths of earthly desires, karma, and suffering into the three virtues of the Dharma, body, wisdom, and emancipation. Truly, earthly desires become enlightenment, and the sufferings of birth and death become nirvana. Why can you chant for benefits when you first start practicing? What is the function of that? It's to establish faith in the truth that Nam Myoho Renge Kyo has power, and to have you try to reveal that power in overcoming obstacles. Okay? That process of overcoming obstacles reveals to you the fact that you have transformative powers within your own life as it relates to who you are as a human being. And wow, where are those problems and all those difficulties really coming from? They're coming from my own actions, my own mind, the way I think, the way I behave. The impetus for all of this understanding and clarity is from the very baby steps that occur from that initial process. Okay? So he's saying, this principle teaches that just as again, I don't know where I'm at. Okay, bottom. In the same writing, on the bottom of page 134, last sentence. In the same writing, Nietzsche concludes by saying that only when we have deep faith that the three paths are themselves the three virtues can we overcome the sufferings of birth and death and be said to have heard the Lotus Sutra in a true sense. Now, what did that just say, though? In saying that, what did Nietzsche just say? In the same writing, which is what it means to hear the Buddha Vehicle for the first time for Volume 2, as I just said a minute ago. Nietzsche concludes by saying that only when we have deep faith that the three paths are themselves the three virtues can we overcome the sufferings of birth and death and be said to have heard the Lotus Sutra in a true sense. But what is that also saying? Where does it? Who else has ever said that? Where does it say that? And provide a means for achieving it. I think it might be theoretically laid out there prior to him. But it's actually what he's saying is that only when you have deep faith in my teaching can you perceive this truth that actually exists and that you can perceive as the truth if you have that faith that opens the door for you to be able to perceive that truth. Do you follow? All right. He says, put another way, when we believe from the depths of our hearts that earthly desires are enlightenment, they're the means by which we're going to achieve this ultimate state of clarity, and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana. Birth and death are no longer a source of suffering. We are then able to truly hear the Lotus Sutra. The principle of the seeds of opposites, which is also referred to as the opening up and merging of the seeds of opposites, means unifying things that are in opposition and revealing their broader significance by understanding them in a larger context, our whole life rather than this moment, this day, this week, right? In our existence. In the case of earthly desires are enlightenment and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana, earthly desires and the sufferings of birth and death, which are in opposition to enlightenment and nirvana, certainly take on a new meaning. It is precisely because we have sufferings that we can earnestly chant to the Gohonzon. That's the truth. Okay? When do you chant your most earnest Daimoku? When you're just happy as shit and don't have any problems? No, it's when everything's caving in. It is precisely because we have sufferings that we can earnestly chant to the Gohonzon. And that earnest Daimoku is what starts to bring forth your genuine Buddha nature. So that thinking starts to actually just materialize in your brain correctly through study and understanding what you're doing. The determination to seriously confront our sufferings, and when would that happen? Only if you have faith in this teaching. right? If you're talking about seriously, the determination to seriously confront
Yeah.
okay, that means that you've bought in to a process to try. You have faith in something that you're actually trying to utilize for the sake of making a change, right? The determination to seriously confront our sufferings causes the fundamental power inherent in our lives to emerge that much more strongly, because now we're not going after superficiality, we're going after depth. When the determination to seriously confront our sufferings, that's not an issue of a single problem. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? All right, so at the moment we chant, our sufferings, our earthly desires have already become causes for enlightenment. Right? I got this problem, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. What did that problem just become? My benefit. I chanted that Nam Myoho Renge Kyo because of that problem. What has that problem just become? My benefit, a source of fortune for me. It's what's driving my desire to chant Daimoku, right?
Yes.
It could even be said that our earthly desires, in fact, contain enlightenment, because that's where you find it. In a sense, earthly desires themselves undergo a quantitative change from earthly desires that cause suffering into earthly desires that can be transformed into enlightenment. It is the power of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, the mystic law of the simultaneity of cause and effect, that makes this possible. Okay? Now, my favorite part of chapter 12 is what I say to you constantly. We are Buddhas just as we are. Okay? We are Buddhas just as we are. President Ikeda has made this a title of a whole section here. Okay? So, ain't me making this up. Right? We are Buddhas just as we are, period. This is the point. There is no attainment of Buddha, and that's what every Buddha realizes. That's the attainment of Buddhahood.
Yes.
Is that understanding really not being something that you have a question about? You know that's the truth. There is no attainment of Buddhahood separate from the earthly desires and sufferings of birth and death of ordinary people. Whoo! Attaining Buddhahood does not mean becoming some kind of superhuman being who transcends all else. This is a point that Second Soka Gakkai President Josei Toda consistently emphasized. He once remarked, earthly desires are enlightenment, and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana, describes a life in which we savor a state of happiness and complete peace of mind based on deep, correct faith, while living with our earthly desires just as they are. Enlightenment is nothing particularly out of the ordinary. Because we have earthly desires, we can experience fulfillment, and because we have fulfillment, we experience happiness. To wake up each morning with a sense of physical well-being, to have a good appetite, to enjoy what we do each day, and to not feel worried or anxious about life. To live in this way is enlightenment. It is nothing exceptional. We should not misconstrue earthly desires or enlightenment as meaning that we will turn into some truly extraordinary being. Mr. Toda was always utterly himself, natural and unpretentious. Outwardly, he was in every way an ordinary person, but his mind was always keenly focused on the advance of the Soka Gakkai. Above all, his sense of responsibility for Kosen Rufu was truly a reflection of his towering state of enlightenment, cherishing a fervent earthly desire to achieve Kosen Rufu. Mr. Toda demonstrated a commitment to this cause that transcended life and death. He based himself on a vast state of life I would describe as enlightenment manifesting as responsibility. To be truly oneself means to continually. To be truly oneself, the Buddha, means to continually polish and develop our lives just as we are, without trying to become something we are not. In other words, it means that the essence of achieving human revolution is none other than showing actual proof of attaining Buddhahood in one's present form. That is, the principles of earthly desires are enlightenment and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana, are actualized in our lives in the midst of our Buddhist practice to keep challenging ourselves through faith. Everybody with me there? All right, the greatest of all joys, bottom of page 137, first column. Striving with the spirit that earthly desires our enlightenment and the sufferings of birth and death and nirvana is a source of joy. There is no greater joy than developing the profound awareness that ordinary people are identical with the highest level of being. And one is a Buddha in both life and death. Our efforts to attain Buddhahood in our present form are always filled with joy. When we tackle our problems head on and summon the wisdom to find a way to surmount them, almost without realizing it, we come to savor a state of immense joy, our lives overflowing with a powerful life force that enables us to put everything that has happened into perspective and take it all in stride. We don't lament the difficulty that we just overcame. We go, yeah! The life state of a Buddha, really, the life state of a Buddha inherently abounds with immense joy because it's the ultimate state of being the ultimate badass that there is. The life state of the Buddha inherently abounds with immense joy because you cannot be defeated by anything. That means you are a badass. Period.
Yes.
Not arrogant in saying that. The life state of the Buddha inherently abounds with immense joy because he never loses. They never lose. It is pervaded by the joy of the law that comes from having arrived at the ultimate truth, which allows them to never lose. Having attained a state of deathlessness, which they will never lose. The Buddha's life overflows eternally with the joy of being alive. Oh, I love this shit. Manifesting Buddhahood means bringing forth the joy of the Buddha from the depths of our being. If we uphold the mystic law with courage, the life force of Buddhahood that enables us to take on any hardship will reveal itself within us. If we have invincible means what? Cannot be conquered, right? If we have invincible hope shining undaunted by even the bitterest setbacks, then this life force will never be exhausted because you will attain Buddhahood in your present form and that life force will never be exhausted. Through the power of the mystic law, we come to realize that though we may once have been overwhelmed by difficulties, we actually have the inner strength to address and overcome them. By dedicating ourselves, page 138, by dedicating ourselves to the great objective of Kosen Rufu, we come to realize that our own problems and worries can serve as the driving force for changing our lives for the better and thereby prove the validity of Nichiren Buddhism. We come to appreciate that our refusal to be defeated by suffering can be a source of inspiration and encouragement to many others. And by maintaining a fighting spirit for Kosen Rufu, we can arrive at the realization that we ourselves are originally Buddhists. The Lotus Sutra speaks of hearts filled with great joy. In the record of the orally transmitted teachings, the phrase great joy is annotated with the words, earthly desires are enlightenment, the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana. The life state of attaining Buddhahood in one's present form, the realization that earthly desires are enlightenment and that the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana, is itself the greatest of all joys because it's the attainment of Buddhahood in your present form. The record of the orally transmitted teachings continues. This passage refers to the great joy that one experiences when one understands for the first time that one's mind from the very beginning has been the Buddha. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is the greatest of all joys. The principles of earthly desires are enlightenment and the sufferings of birth and death or nirvana indicate that we can lead strong, fulfilling lives characterized by joy so broad and enduring that it can embrace any kind of suffering or sorrow. And notice it say, can embrace. So you take the suffering and the sorrow, you don't run from it, you embrace it. You realize that at the heart of that is your great victory and your joy. It's not suffering. You understand? Can fulfilling lives characterized by joy so broad and enduring, that's faith so deep, it can embrace any kind of suffering or sorrow, even terminal disease. So you're going to, no biggie, anything. I recall the following words of Tolstoy. Rejoice, rejoice, one's life work, one's mission is a joy. Rejoice to the sky, to the sun, to the stars, to the grass, to the trees, to the animals, to one's fellow human beings. Be ever vigilant that nothing destroys this happiness. Should it be destroyed, it means that you have somewhere made a mistake. Find that mistake and correct it. The stance of another great author that one's life's work, one's mission is a joy, certainly resonates with the profound philosophy of Buddhism. Our Buddhist practice enables us to feel a deep and abiding joy in our lives. Tolstoy further says that we should find any mistake that destroys this happiness and take action to correct it. From the standpoint of Buddhism, this corresponds to the practice of positively transforming earthly desires and the sufferings of birth and death. That is, to internalizing the principles of earthly desires, our enlightenment, and the sufferings of birth and death, our nirvana, and striving to change our karma. We of the SGI who embrace and practice the mystic law, though we may experience periods of suffering or illusion, are truly walking the path of champions of unsurpassed wisdom and philosophy. Through our faith in Nichiren Buddhism, we can positively transform all poison through the great beneficial medicine of the mystic law. Nichiren Daishonin writes, through the extraordinary power of the character Myo, or wonderful, this poison of earthly desires and the sufferings of birth and death is changed into the understanding that the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana, that earthly desires are enlightenment. The mystic law is a precious principle. Continuing, that was from Attaining Buddhahood in One's Present Form. The mystic law is a precious principle for achieving a life of absolute victory. By basing themselves on the mystic law, now last page, 140, each individual can lead a life of triumph in which earthly desires are enlightenment and the sufferings of birth and death are nirvana. That ever-increasing numbers of people are living with such brilliance as they share in the heritage of the ultimate law of life and death demonstrates the success of Nichiren Buddhism. And I'll stop there. And we'll go on with the study guide in chapter 13 and finish this off.
Mr. Lee's answer. You say yours answer it later.
After we're done with this, because he's talking about going in again. For Mr. Lee, let me just say, Mr. Lee, your question is once again from chapter 7 of the Lotus Sutra, which is the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra, and it really has no place or basis in the latter day of the law, the time frame that we're in now. And so to lament or worry about a correct understanding of chapter 7 of the Lotus Sutra is not a worthwhile endeavor. I'll be very honest with you. You're still studying the Buddhism of the harvest and putting stock in something that no longer has any power or validity. It's the fifth, we're in Mappo now, bro. You've been listening, you know that. But I'll go into that by going into chapter 7 when we finish this lecture completely. I will go and read chapter 7 to you. It's not about some old guy sitting under a tree for a long time. It's about changing, transforming the three vehicles into the one vehicle of Buddhahood. Thank you. Until next week. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.